Hello, back with another Keyframe Coach review. So we have a shot here from Miko, and Miko says, "This is a shot I've worked on for the last couple of weeks. My showreel is lacking a really good acting shot, so I really want to nail it with this one. I haven't really animated the big guy yet. I was just focusing on the main character for now." Cool. So let's have a watch. I have already made my notes, but we'll take a look together and go over those notes together.
What? That's not the right weapon! Why would it? It's not
Nice. I think this is a really good idea. I like it a lot. I think it could be very fun. So, what did I have for notes? So, I'm going to turn off that audio. So first up, when he kind of comes in here, just feels like, let me just turn, okay, sketches are off. When he comes through here, just the way he kind of settles in, feels a little bit labored. It feels like we could just be a bit snappier into that. Like all of this settle just feels a little bit too long and a little bit too linear. But not so much linear, just like he's kind of floating through those movements a little. So we can kind of tighten those up. And then with the big, well, we'll go over those drawings first, I guess. So that comes in. I thought here you could have a little more compression, and then you could actually jump out of this slide. So this is nice. I like how he kind of compresses through when and there's a nice bit of overlap there and a bit of weight as he just avoids the door. Then I thought you could kind of compress him and then jump out of that into an up and then kind of land back into that pose that you have. So if I just play that through, can kind of a bit more quickly get into that pose. I'll just give him a bit more energy, like he's kind of ready for whatever's about to happen. So we have compression, an up, jump, a stretch, into a compression, into the final pose. And then when he's in that pose, I felt like you were maybe moving him too much when he's going in and getting the knife out. Feels like that could be a lot more isolated to sell that comedy beat. So I just drew that. Obviously, you can have a little bit more mechanics in there when he reaches and, you know, a little overlap and things, but I'm not going to draw things that subtle because I'm just not that talented. But essentially, yeah, reach in and reach in sooner as well. So he can kind of be in this pose. We have a beat to read this pose. It's not moving through that pose, really. I mean, it's moving holding, but it's not, you know, doing this kind of transition out of his landing to then instantly go and get the knife. He's kind of in that pose and then gets the knife out. Nice and isolated. And I think that would just be funnier. And kind of get the knife out. I like what you've done. All of your beats here. I think the acting's nice. And he kind of is in that like ready pose. It feels good. Just has a little glance to it. And it feels isolated as well, like it just happens in the face. He's not doing too much head movement. You could potentially add a little head movement in there just to kind of complement that eye dart. So it's kind of like just, and then it's a bigger head move the second time. Just a slight one. And again, I like the take. I kind of like the beats and stuff. I think that's all pretty clear to me. I think here we can adjust a couple of things with the posing. So kind of felt like we could maybe be a bit more out with this knife, just to, you know, get a bit more 1, 2, 3 with these lines, and just have a bit clearer of what's going on with his arm. When you stack things over the top like that, you kind of just get the impression that you've got like an arm and then it's just a hand. So it'd be nice to get a clearer silhouette on that. You could potentially push the fingers out a bit and get some more kind of shockedness in his hands. And then I think you could also play with, because you've got quite a wide stance here, you could also play with just pushing that so you go from kind of a wide triangle shape to a bit more of a, you know, a stretched, a bit more of a stretched triangle shape, just to get that squash and stretch. If you think about your characters like that, that's a good way to get some nice contrast in there. One previous note I just overlooked was I would probably just get this knee in and get kind of this back foot being a bit more bent. And I'd probably also just play with that line of action a bit more, just to get something a bit more ready, I guess. A bit more kind of bent over, just kind of getting that nice sort of line through. So you almost have like this, oops. And then these can kind of flow through a bit nicer. So I think that just comes from the, I'll delete that. That just comes from this, again, kind of feeling a bit stacked. Like you clearly see like a 1, 2, 3 there. And then on this leg, it just feels a little stacked. It's kind of like not quite in and it's not quite out. So I would just personally give it that kind of treatment and just get them kind of both the same sort of way. So yeah, go from that wide shape to a nice kind of more complex, more stretched shape, I guess. A more kind of pushed in legs, just get that contrast going. And it also feels like when he lands, he's kind of landing a bit wide again. It's that similar thing where things are feeling a little stacked and we're just not getting those clear kind of angles. I'd probably do something like this. And then again, just a bit more of a C shape in his spine. And then probably a clearer silhouette as well. So you just have the knife in its own silhouette. And also a bit more like concern in his eyes, getting these eyebrows pointing up. Versus what they are now, which I think is just feeling a little default. And then for the acting here, so let's just have a look at what you have. Turn on the audio as well for the acting bit.
What? That's not the right weapon! What? That's not the right weapon! What? That's not the right weapon!
So I really like that he kind of comes back to this pose from, you know, from this pose to this pose. Just kind of coming in and being like, he's looking at it, he's like, no, that's not what I wanted. I just feel like you could stay more in this kind of pose the whole time rather than like kind of going up and really opening himself out and then coming back in, which would then leave that kind of movement for when you're getting out of this pose, when he's like, oh, just, he can then go into that kind of like, oh God, when he just accepts his fate. Well, not accepts his fate, but it just kind of goes up. And just turns to him and he's like, oh, please, I thought I had the weapon. This is kind of awkward. So what I would do instead is land him, and then he maybe does the turn that you have, but not with his whole body. It's just like, he's like, oh God, you know, it's a bit more isolated. I think this was just, yeah, kind of the same pose again, kind of keeping him in that pose. So just like, I just that was that. And then maybe a gesture similar to what you have, but he's just kind of still in that pose. So he's just holding that thing. And he's like, I didn't. Rather than coming out of that and just changing the entire pose, it's just like that, like the knife the whole time kind of stays in the same place, and it's just all about him kind of acting around the knife and being like, can't you? You see how that would kind of complement the idea of him like having this tiny knife. If he's moving the knife around a lot, it kind of takes focus away from the knife. If he's moving a lot around the knife and the knife is just still and he's like, oh, I don't know, then it kind of draws attention to the knife and the joke that he's got a small knife.
What? That's not the right weapon!
And then again, everything just kind of staying a bit more isolated. So we kind of stay in that pose, maybe act a little in that pose. And then here he's just like, the weapon. Oh, and then it's just like an isolated hand pose. Again, some maybe residual motion in the body, but maybe not like an entire pose change, essentially. And then make sure we're just hitting that like on or just before. Well, yeah, so I have it like on the beat, but could potentially be like a frame. If in doubt, like one frame before the audio. But yeah, it feels like it just hits like 3 or 4 frames too late right now. So just make that like quite a snappy movement. And then I guess it's quite a different movement to go from this pose compared to kind of this pose that he has. But, you know, you don't have to get overly complex with it. I would just kind of vary up the contrast in his movement. So before he's kind of like quite erratic and like, oh, I didn't mean to. And then he can kind of be like, oh, I guess I've got to like face you with this knife then. So I think it would be nice to get some contrast between his legs here. If he maybe just like straightens up, if he's like in this kind of ready action pose, and then he just kind of like stands and just gets a bit more straighter in his legs. So that does 2 things. That gives you contrast to the previous pose, and it kind of gets him in a totally non-action ready pose. So he's just kind of like standing there, waiting to be crushed essentially by this big guy. But it also gives you more room to go when he does kind of sink to his lowest on the floor. And on that note, I would push that as much as possible. So really, you know, get his bum down on the back of his feet, get this C shape really kind of slumped, get his head almost like you could, you know, potentially push it. I haven't drawn it here, but, you know, potentially push that head down so the neck is down a bit more. Maybe not shoulders up because he's just like completely given up, but you can see when I do that my head is kind of like in the silhouette of my back just a bit compared to if I'm sitting upright. So whatever we can do to just kind of sink him and really deflate him so he's just like, oh, it's not fair. And then I would also get this knife into a clear silhouette there as well. And then I guess I just drew a little small mouth because I thought it'd be funny for him to be kind of like feeling sorry for himself and like a little baby just sulking, you know. Just think to yourself in this moment, he's just sulky. He's just he thought he was gonna be able to do it, and he's just kind of completely wimped out, I guess. So that's just like a bottom lip with a upper lip thing, like a boss baby thing, you know, whatever you can do to get that kind of thing in there. But I think for now that's kind of most of what I wanted to talk about. There'll be some kind of mechanics to work out between these poses for sure, but I would just film reference. I think that's definitely the best thing to do between those. I would definitely vary it compared to the rest, so keep the rest fairly snappy and sharp with his movements, sorry. And then when it gets to here, I would kind of treat that a bit more body mechanicsy, and he's just going from this action pose to like, oh god, oh, and then just goes into kind of what you already have, but you know, with additional poses on top. I did also want to just look at this action as well. This acting, I mean.
Why would you do? It's not.
I felt like that was really quite funny, and just having this kind of pose on top of it, where he's just like standing up and he just looks normal, and he's just like, oh my god, I feel like that could plus that by, it's just essentially not having his legs so far apart, so he's not in action mode anymore. He's just in pedestrian mode. He's like, is there anything I can do for you to not just kill me?
Why would you do? It's not. It's not.
Like he's just, it's nice. He's just searching for ideas, searching for any glimmer of hope, and he's just like, oh god, it's nice. What you've done is nice. I just work into that with, you know, pushing your poses, and one thing I guess to have a bit more of a focus on as well is your facial expressions in here. So I think that one's working pretty nicely, but things do feel a little twinned. So all right, so this is nice in his eyebrows. Probably get just a bit more desperation in there if possible. And then with his like mouth, I would just vary that so that we're kind of reading that a bit more. So you're just opening up to one side. Just feels a little bit in the middle of his head right now. So it's just got a mouth there. As opposed to, I mean, this is going to be a terrible drawing. I can't even believe I'm drawing this, but you know, this versus, you know, a bit more of this just kind of opens up the face a little more. He's got a nose as well. So, if I get off that terrible drawing I just did, that is pretty much all that I had. Thank you very much, Miko, for sending this in. It's coming along great. And until next time, if you guys are interested in a Keyframe Coach review, check out keyframecoach.com. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.